My name is Victoria. I'm 30 years old. For 3 years, my mother told everyone in our zip code that I was a basement-dwelling leech, while she played the saintly martyr surviving on a dwindling pension. She mocked my lack of ambition at neighborhood brunches, accepted pity groceries from the church, and treated me like a ghost in my own home. But on the night of her 60th birthday gala, in front of the town's wealthiest elite, a certified letter from the IRS arrived that would expose every lie she ever told about our lives. What she didn't know was that while she was busy building a fiction, I was the one building the foundation. And I held the receipts that would flip her entire world upside down. The neighborhood of Oakwood Heights was old suburban prestige, the kind of place where reputations are worth more than the homes, and my mother, Evelyn, was its self-appointed queen. She acted as if she still sat on the board of the empire my father left behind, a consultancy firm that had once been the talk of the tri-state area. By 2024, that legacy was a hollow shell, rotting from her secret gambling debts and unpaid taxes. I was born with a mind for logic, a software architect who could see the code in everything from bank statements to architectural blueprints. While I was pulling in 6 figures as a remote consultant, working 16-hour days in a guest house that smelled of stale coffee and desperation, my mother's response wasn't pride. It was a calculated campaign of shame. She told the neighbors I had failed out of the real world. She told them I was a burden she was too kind to evict. I let her believe her own lies to protect her dignity, but I was about to learn that in Oakwood Heights, no good deed goes unpunished. I live in the guest house, a converted garage at the edge of the property that my mother, Evelyn, calls the shed when she's talking to the neighbors. Inside, the walls are lined with 3 32-inch monitors, their blue light bathing my face in a perpetual digital glow from 6 a.m. until well past midnight. I am a freelance software architect, a woman who builds the invisible skeletons of multi-million-dollar platforms. To my clients in London and San Francisco, I am a high-precision instrument, a consultant whose hourly rate could buy a designer handbag. But within the wrought iron fences of Oakwood Heights, I am the resident ghost. The windows of the guest house don't have heavy curtains, so I see the theater of my mother's life play out every morning. At 10 a.m., I watched through the glass as she stopped the mailman, Mr. Henderson, near the hydrangea bushes. I was mid-code, my fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard, debugging a latency issue for a fintech firm. I didn't need to open the window to know what she was saying. Her hand gestures, a weary wipe of the brow, a frustrated point toward my door, told the story she'd perfected over the last 3 years. "She's still asleep, poor thing," Evelyn would sigh, her voice carrying just enough to ensure the neighbor pruning her roses heard it too. "I try to wake her, I really do. But when a girl has no drive, no spark, what can a mother do? I just keep the fridge stocked and pray she finds herself." I leaned back, my neck popping from 14 hours of focused tension. The irony was a physical weight in the room. While she was out there collecting sympathy points like trading cards, I was the one who had just authorized a $4,000 wire transfer to her mortgage servicer to stop a foreclosure notice she didn't even know was coming. I was the one who paid the gardener she was currently chatting with. I was the one who had cleared her secret $12,000 credit card debt from an unlucky weekend in Atlantic City the month before. I stayed in the shadows of the guest house, a silent ghost in a charcoal hoodie, watching the Queen of Oakwood play the martyr. I let her have the spotlight. I let her tell the mailman I was a leech. I told myself I was doing it for Dad's memory, to keep the family name from the gutter of bankruptcy. I was a software architect, after all. I was trained to handle the back end so the front end looked seamless. But as I watched her tuck a pity casserole from the neighbor under her arm, a cold, hard bit of data flickered in my mind. Systems fail when the load becomes too heavy for the foundation to hold. And my mother had no idea how close her foundation was to cracking. The neighborhood brunch was a monthly ritual of social posturing, held under the weeping willows of the main house's patio. I wasn't invited as a guest. I was summoned as the special project. My mother had spent the morning carefully selecting my outfit, a shapeless, faded cardigan and a pair of old jeans, to ensure I looked exactly like the person she described in her hushed, pitying phone calls. "Victoria, dear, could you refresh Mrs. Gable's mimosa?" Evelyn's voice was melodic, floating over the clinking of china and the scent of expensive quiche. I moved through the crowd of silk scarves and gold watches, a silent servant in my own backyard. As I poured the chilled champagne, Mrs. Gable, a woman whose charity foundation I had anonymously donated $5,000 to last Christmas, patted my hand with a look of profound sorrow. "It's so brave of your mother to keep you here, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice thick with condescension. Not many parents would tolerate a woman your age just drifting. My son is at Goldman, you know. He says the job market is tough, but surely there's a secretarial opening somewhere. I forced a tight, practiced smile. My phone vibrated in my pocket, a Slack notification from a CTO in Singapore regarding a 5-figure contract, but I couldn't check it. I had to play the part. Across the patio, Evelyn was the center of a sympathetic circle. She was holding a small, hand-knitted blanket and a basket of gourmet muffins. "Oh, you shouldn't have," Evelyn sighed, dabbing at a dry eye. "But thank you. It's hard, you know, seeing her so lost. I've had to dip into my travel fund just to keep the lights on for her. I wanted to see Tuscany this year, but my mother's sacrifice never ends." The crowd murmured their approval of her nobility. I stood by the stone pillar, the heavy silver tray shaking slightly in my grip. I looked at the muffins, the pity gifts, and then at my mother's radiant, lying face. She wasn't just stealing my reputation, she was monetizing my supposed failure. Every guest there believed they were helping a struggling widow support a deadbeat daughter. None of them knew that the very patio they stood on had been saved from an auction block by a wire transfer I sent at 3 a.m. 3 months ago. None of them knew that the travel fund Evelyn mourned had actually disappeared into the bright lights of a casino floor in Atlantic City. The air felt thin, the hypocrisy of the brunch suffocating. I caught my mother's eye, and for a split second, the mask slipped. She didn't look at me with love or even guilt. She looked at me with the cold, calculating eyes of a director making sure her lead actress didn't miss a cue. "Don't just stand there, Victoria," she called out, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "The guests need more napkins. Try to be useful, just for today." The following Tuesday, the illusion began to shatter. It started with a heavy thud against the guest house door. Not the usual dainty rap of my mother's knuckles, but the authoritative strike of a professional. I opened it to find a courier holding a digital clipboard and a thick, cream-colored envelope with a translucent window. "Victoria, I need a signature. Certified mail from the Department of the Treasury." I signed, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I retreated to my desk, the monitors humming like a digital choir as I slid a letter opener through the seal. I expected a routine query about my corporate filing. What I found instead was a notice of deficiency and intent to levy. As a software architect, I'm trained to scan for bugs, for the one line of code that crashes the entire system. I found it on page 3. My mother hadn't just been lying to the neighbors, she had been lying to the government. For 3 years, Evelyn had filed her taxes by claiming me as a qualifying relative, a disabled, destitute dependent with zero income. To justify the hardship status she used to defer her property taxes and qualify for senior assistance programs, she had forged my signature on a dozen affidavits, swearing under penalty of perjury that I didn't earn a cent. The blood in my veins turned to ice. My actual tax filings, the ones showing a healthy 6-figure income, had finally collided with her fraudulent ones in the IRS's central database. The system had flagged the massive discrepancy. They weren't just coming for her, they were coming for the household. "Victoria, are you in there?" The door swung open, and Evelyn swept in, her silk robe billowing. She didn't look at the papers in my hand. She looked at the mess on my desk with a practiced sneer. "I saw a courier. If that's another one of those packages for your little computer hobbies, I hope you used your own money. I'm already stretched thin paying for the gardener's seasonal planting. I had to take a bridge loan just to cover the catering for my gala next week." I looked at her, truly looked at her, and realized the bridge loan was likely another lie to cover a weekend at the craps table. I held up the letter, my voice coming out as a low, dangerous hum. "The IRS sent a notice, Mom. They're auditing the dependency claim you've been filing since 2021. Evelyn's face didn't crumble. It hardened. The martyr mask didn't slip. It fused into a shield of pure arrogance. "Don't be dramatic, Victoria. It's just paperwork. I'll tell them you're confused. You've always struggled with the details of adult life. That's why I have to handle everything. You forged my name, Mother. You told the federal government I'm a charity case while I was paying your mortgage." She leaned over my desk, her perfume cloying and suffocating. "And who are they going to believe? The pillar of the community who lost her husband and took in her wayward daughter, or the girl who hasn't left this room in 3 years? Sit down, keep coding, and let me handle the grown-up problems." She turned and floated out, leaving the door wide open. I looked back at my screens. 4 years, I had been the resident ghost, keeping the back end running while she took the credit. But a system with this much corrupted data couldn't be patched anymore. It had to be purged. The door clicked shut, but the silence that followed wasn't peaceful, it was predatory. My mother's arrogance was a firewall I had helped build, brick by brick, with every silent wire transfer and every swallowed insult. But as a software architect, I knew every firewall had a backdoor. I turned back to my triple monitor setup. My fingers didn't shake, they shifted into a familiar rhythmic dance across the keys. I wasn't just a girl on a computer, as Evelyn liked to tell the bridge club. I was a specialist in data forensic recovery. If she wanted to treat me like a ghost, I would become one, drifting through the digital veins of her life to see exactly how deep the rot went. I started with the family legacy account, the one my father had left with a comfortable 7-figure cushion. I bypassed the 2-factor authentication on her tablet. She'd used my birthday as the PIN, a final irony, and watched the ledger materialize. The screen bled red. The 7 figures were gone. In their place was a spiderweb of payday loans, marker credits from Atlantic City casinos, and 3 separate helics on the house I thought I was saving. Every time I had sent her money for property taxes or roof repairs, the funds had stayed in her account for less than 6 hours before being drained into a digital wallet linked to an offshore betting site. "My God, Mom," I whispered, the blue light of the monitor reflecting in my wide eyes. She wasn't just a liar, she was a vacuum. She had been using my high-earning career as a secret insurance policy for her addiction. The $10,000 bridge loan she'd mentioned for her gala? It wasn't for catering. It was a high-interest cash advance to cover a bounced check at a local high-stakes poker game. I dug deeper, pulling the metadata from the tax affidavits she'd filed. She had scanned my signature from an old passport application and digitally superimposed it onto the handship and disability forms. She had told the IRS I was cognitively impaired and unable to maintain gainful employment. She had turned my quiet success into a legal diagnosis of failure just to save herself a few $1,000s in credits. A notification popped up on my secondary screen, a calendar alert. Evelyn's 60th birthday gala. 48 hours remaining. The Queen of Oakwood was planning to stand in front of 300 people and accept accolades for her strength while the daughter she'd legally lobotomized sat in the garage. She thought she had deleted the evidence of her true self. But she forgot one thing about ghosts. We see everything, and we never forget the password. I reached for a stack of high-gloss presentation folders I'd bought for a client pitch. I wouldn't be pitching a software platform this time. I would be presenting an autopsy. The morning of the gala, Evelyn didn't just walk into the guest house. She invaded it. She was wearing a silk kimono and holding a stack of invoices like a scepter. The air in my small office, usually heavy with the scent of ozone and focused energy, was suddenly choked by her expensive floral perfume. "Victoria, I need you to authorize a transfer," she said, her voice dropping into that rehearsed, fragile register she used for her sacrifices. "The caterers for tonight are being incredibly difficult. They want the remaining $10,000 before they even begin the setup. Apparently, they don't value loyalty in this town anymore." I didn't turn away from my screens. I was looking at a spreadsheet, not for a client, but the one I had titled the Evelyn Audit. $10,000, Mom? You told me last month the gala was fully funded by your travel savings. A sharp, impatient sigh escaped her. "Well, prices have risen, and between your electricity bills and the special organic groceries I buy to keep you healthy, my margins have disappeared. Honestly, Victoria, it's the least you can do. You've lived here for 3 years without contributing a single cent to the mortgage. Do you have any idea what the market rate for a guest house in Oakwood Heights is?" I finally turned my chair, my gaze level and cold. I have a very good idea of the market rate. I also have a very good idea of where the $42,000 I've given you for home maintenance over the last 12 months actually went. Hint, it wasn't the roof. Evelyn's face didn't crumble. It sharpened into a mask of pure, indignant fury. "How dare you? I took you in when you were drifting. I have protected your reputation from the gossip of this neighborhood while you sat in here playing with your little codes. If you had any sense of gratitude, you'd be writing that check with a smile. Instead, you're acting like a common bookkeeper." She stepped closer, pointing a manicured finger at my chest. "You are 30 years old and still living on my property, Victoria. If I have to go into debt to maintain the family's status while you hide back here like a hermit, that is on your conscience, not mine. Pay the caterers. I won't have my 60th birthday ruined because my daughter is too selfish to support her mother. And if I don't? I asked quietly. Then I suppose I'll have to tell Mrs. Gable and the others why the party was cancelled, she whispered, a cruel light in her eyes. I'll tell them you had a relapse. That your mental state has become so unstable I can no longer afford to keep you here. Is that the story you want the neighborhood to hear? She thought she was threatening me with a social death sentence. She didn't realize that in 48 hours, I would be the one holding the gavel. Fine, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. I'll pay the $10,000. But Mom, make sure you enjoy the party. Make sure every single person you've ever lied to is there to see it. Evelyn smiled, a triumphant, predatory expression. Of course, dear. It's going to be a night they'll never forget. I stood in the kitchen of the main house that evening, the smell of expensive lilies and floor wax signaling the final preparations for the gala. Evelyn was at the marble island, adjusting her diamond earrings in a handheld mirror, looking every bit the poised matriarch of Oakwood Heights. I held a single manila folder in my hand, the last chance I was willing to give her to fix this before the world saw what I had found. Mom, we need to talk. Privately. Before the guests arrive, I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. Evelyn didn't even lower the mirror. She just tilted her head, checking her profile. Not now, Victoria. The florist is 20 minutes late and the wine steward is a disaster. Whatever crisis you've manufactured in that dark little room of yours can wait until tomorrow. It's about the IRS filing, Mom. And the $10,000 for the caterers that I just traced to a digital betting account. I know about the disability affidavits. I know you forged my name to the federal government. Finally, she turned. But she didn't look afraid. She let out a short, sharp laugh, the kind of laugh she used when I was 6 and had skinned my knee. It was patronizing, dismissive, and utterly cold. Oh, Victoria. You and your data. You think because you can move numbers around on a screen, you understand how the world works. This is Oakwood Heights. People believe what they see, and what they see is a grieving widow supporting a daughter who can't even afford a car. She stepped toward me, her silk gown rustling. Look at you. You're wearing a hoodie from a tech conference and sneakers. You haven't had a real office to go to in years. You're a ghost, remember? If you go to the police, or the neighbors, or the IRS, I'll simply tell them the truth, that your freelancing is a fantasy you made up to cope with your failure. That you're delusional. Who do you think they'll believe? The woman who founded the garden club, or the girl who lives in a garage? I have the bank statements, Mother. I have the IP logs from your tablet showing exactly when you accessed my accounts. Evelyn leaned in close, her eyes narrowing into slits. Then go ahead. Try to explain IP logs to Mrs. Gable. Try to show metadata to the sheriff. They don't care about your digital toys, Victoria. They care about status. And in this town, I am the sun, and you are just a shadow I'm kind enough to let linger. She reached out and flicked the edge of my folder with a manicured nail. Now, go put on that dress I bought you and try to look grateful. Or don't come at all. It might actually be easier to explain your absence as another depressive episode. It certainly fits the narrative better. She swept past me, the scent of her perfume lingering like a threat. I looked down at the folder. She was right about one thing. The neighborhood didn't understand code or metadata. But they understood money. And they understood being lied to. I walked back to the guest house, my heart no longer racing. It was calm. Clinical. I had tried to give her a backdoor out of the system. She had chosen to override it. Now, it was time for the hard reset. The guest house was silent, save for the rhythmic chug of the high-speed laser printer I'd hidden in the closet. Usually, this machine spit out wireframes and system architectures. Tonight, it was printing the blueprints of a social execution. I sat at my desk, the glow of my 3 monitors illuminating a stack of 30 professional navy blue folders. I wasn't just compiling bank statements. I was building a user-friendly interface for a neighborhood that didn't understand technology but understood the language of the martyr. Each folder was meticulously organized. On the left side, I placed the color-coded spending versus source charts. I used bright green to highlight every dollar of my income that had flowed into the household, and a deep, bruised purple for the gambling debits that had instantly sucked it back out. I included the receipts for the roof repairs that never happened, the travel fund that was actually a high-stakes blackjack loss, and the $10,000 bridge loan for tonight's gala that had been laundered through a digital wallet at 3 a.m. On the right side, I placed the heavy hitters, the IRS notice of deficiency and the forged disability and dependency affidavits. I highlighted the signature line where my mother had clumsily traced my name, and next to it, I paperclipped a copy of my actual 1040 form showing a 6-figure salary. Data doesn't have a narrative, Mom, I whispered into the dark room. It just exists. Evelyn thought she was the sun and I was the shadow, but she forgot that shadows are created by a source. I was the source of every light currently burning in the main house. I was the source of the champagne being iced and the silk gown she was preening in. Without my hidden work, her world was a blackout. I spent the final hours before dawn practicing my presentation. I wouldn't be the trembling, unstable daughter she described to the garden club. I would be the architect. I would speak in the same clinical, unimpeachable tone I used when presenting to a board of directors. I wasn't there to scream or cry. I was there to deliver a final audit. As the sun began to crest over the manicured hedges of Oakwood Heights, I closed the final folder. I felt a strange, cold peace, the kind you feel when a complex piece of code finally compiles without a single error. The system was loaded. The triggers were set. All that was left was the public demonstration. I looked at the dress Evelyn had bought me, a drab, oversized thing meant to make me look diminished. I left it on the floor. Instead, I pulled out my sharpest black suit, the one I wore for high-stakes contract negotiations. The chandelier in the main ballroom of the Oakwood Country Club cast a fractured, golden light over 300 guests. Evelyn stood on the dais, a glass of vintage cristal in her hand, looking every bit the besieged but noble queen. I stood in the shadows near the service entrance, my black suit a sharp, modern contrast to the sea of pastels and pearls. I clutched the stack of navy blue folders to my chest like a shield. As I reached this milestone, Evelyn's voice wavered with practiced emotion. I look around this room and see so much success. It's a bittersweet sight. Many of you know the burden I've carried since my husband passed, the struggle of maintaining this legacy while supporting a daughter who simply couldn't find her way. A murmur of scripted sympathy rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Gable dabbed her eyes. Evelyn sighed, her gaze drifting toward the back of the room, finding me. Victoria, dear, I'm so glad you're here to witness this. Even if you can't contribute, I want you to know you'll always have a place in my home, no matter how much my retirement costs me. She raised her glass for the final toast. To my family. Even the broken parts. Actually, Mom, I said, my voice cutting through the silent room like a clinical blade. I stepped out of the shadows, my heels clicking a steady rhythmic beat against the marble. Let's talk about retirement. And let's talk about who's actually paying for this champagne. The room went deathly quiet. Evelyn's smile didn't just fade, it froze, a glitch in her perfect programming. Victoria, please. This isn't the time for one of your episodes. This isn't an episode, Evelyn. It's an audit. I reached the front of the room and began handing out the navy blue folders to the guests in the front row, the bank presidents, the city council members, and the IRS agents who lived 3 doors down. Inside, you'll find the blueprints of a 3-year fraud. You'll see the $140,000 I've wired into this legacy since 2021. You'll see the gambling debts that swallowed it. And most importantly, you'll see the forged disability affidavits my mother filed to avoid paying the very taxes this town relies on. Mrs. Gable opened her folder, her gasp echoing in the vaulted ceiling. One by one, the Queen's Court began to read. They didn't see a failed millennial. They saw a software architect's tax returns. They saw the pity money they donated being funneled into offshore betting accounts. This is a lie, Evelyn shrieked, her voice cracking as she reached for the microphone. She's unstable. She's a ghost. I'm not a ghost anymore, Mom, I said, leaning in so the microphone caught my whisper. I'm the one who just initiated a rollback on your entire life. I looked at the neighbors, the people who had looked down on me for years. Their expressions had shifted from pity to a cold, sharpening horror. They weren't looking at a saintly martyr. They were looking at a con artist who had used her own daughter as a human shield. Evelyn dropped her glass. It shattered at her feet, the expensive champagne soaking into the hem of her Valentino gown. For the first time in 30 years, she had no script, no audience, and no exit strategy. The morning after the gala, the main house was silent, the festive scent of lilies now sour and wilting in the foyer. Evelyn sat at the marble island, her shoulders slumped, staring at a stack of navy blue folders that had been left behind by her loyal friends. The neighborhood group chats were already a digital wildfire. By sunrise, the Queen of Oakwood Heights had been effectively guillotined. I walked in, not through the service entrance, but through the front door, carrying a single manila envelope. My heels clicked on the floor, a sound of ownership, not a haunting. "They're all calling me Victoria," she whispered, her voice stripped of its theatrical vibrato. "Mrs. Gable, the HOA board, even the club. They want me to resign. They're talking about an investigation into the charity funds. You've destroyed everything." "No, Mom," I said, sliding the envelope across the marble. "I just stopped paying for the stage. You destroyed the rest yourself." She opened the envelope, her eyes scanning the legal text. Her breath hitched. It was a deed of transfer and a mortgage satisfaction piece. "What is this? While you were busy trying to convince the IRS I was a dependent, I was busy buying your debt," I said, my voice clinical and calm. "I didn't just pay the arrears. I negotiated a private buyout of the mortgage from the bank 2 weeks ago. The house doesn't belong to the Whitford legacy, or a gambling depleted estate. It belongs to me. Effectively, I'm your landlord now." Evelyn looked up, the old spark of defiance flickering for a second. "You can't evict your own mother. Think of the scandal." "The scandal is already here, Evelyn. And I'm not evicting you. Not yet." I leaned over the island, looking her directly in the eye. "But the rules of the system have changed. The guest house is being converted into a proper detached office. You will stay in the main house, but the Martyr Act is retired. You will attend GA meetings, you will turn over your passport, and every cent of your actual pension will go toward repaying the taxes you evaded in my name." I stood up straight, the weight of 3 years of gaslighting finally evaporating. "From now on, when the neighbors ask how I'm doing, you'll tell them the truth. That your daughter is a successful architect who saved you from a prison cell. You'll tell them I'm the reason you still have a roof over your head." Evelyn looked at the deed, then at me. For the first time in my life, she didn't see a slow child or a basement dweller. She saw the person who held the keys to her survival. "I understand," she whispered. I turned to leave, heading back toward the guest house to start my workday. I had a 9 a.m. call with a client in Tokyo, and for the first time, I wasn't worried about the noise from the main house. The code was clean. The bugs were patched. The resident ghost was gone, and in her place stood the woman who finally owned her own story.